Welcome to the Space Marketing Podcast, where we look at marketing principles, strategies, and tactics through the lens of space. Hi, I am your host, Izzy, and I am so excited to share this journey with you as we explore all the different space industries. And on this particular episode, we look at the space media and news segment as well as the cybersecurity segment with Brandon Karpf, Executive Director of N2K Networks. So, lift off in 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Space Marketing Podcast. Information relating to our discussion today and links to the video version can be found in the episode show notes on spacemarketingpodcast.com. Please like and subscribe to the podcast. It will help more people reach beyond the atmosphere. Information in this episode is for entertainment and information only. Please consult a professional for your specific situation. Our next guest is Brandon Karpf, Executive Director of N2K Networks, and I love his bio. Brandon states, "My alignment is chaotic good, and I'm obsessed with podcasts. What are your favorites?" He is an executive director that has led teams of cyber Jedis across the full spectrum of cyber ops. Most of the time he's spent going after the Galactic Senate to keep them off their backs. He is passionate about cybersecurity, education, and privacy. Security and privacy should be totally understandable, stress-free, and ready to use. His mission is to make that a reality. And N2K Businesses delivers the workforce intelligence that you need to build and maintain high-performance teams. And N2K's latest foray into space is a daily news podcast called T- Space Daily, with a deep dive on the weekends with guests that include people like George Neal from the Global Spaceport Alliance. And I'm a bit of a spaceport enthusiast there. If you're following me, then you know why. And you have another daily, which is also a B2B cybersecurity audio network that called the CyberWire Daily. So help me welcome Brandon to the podcast. How are you?
Thank you very much for having me, Izzy. It's great to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you here. And I got to tell you, I'm a big fan of T-. I listen to it all the time. And, space may be beyond the atmosphere, but we have a little community down here. And we barely missed each other at SpaceCom this past spring.
Yep.
And Adele at Ivona, she actually introduced us back a couple of weeks ago. And then you also have Alice that has joined your team too, which I like to consider myself a friend of Alice's. So
yeah, we're trying our best to make waves. You know, we're a new entrant into the space market, but we've quickly made some great friends, like you've mentioned, and we all enjoy the Space Marketing Podcast over on our side, and have enjoyed getting to know you and talking to the folks that we've gotten a chance to interview and publish. And people like Adele have been incredibly helpful to getting us off the ground. So it's been an excellent 3 months, a lot of fun since we launched our N2K Space Network back in April.
How did that come about? I mean, it was all cybersecurity, and now you're coming into space. You want to tell us how that connection happened? Because I have been listening, so I actually got a clue on the answer to that. But let's tell our audience.
Yeah, my business N2K Networks. We envision a world where workforce knowledge changes as fast as technology does. We've been doing that for workforces in cybersecurity for a number of years, for almost 8 years now, to some great success. We've launched and kind of built the largest B2B audio network in cybersecurity. We have a robust workforce development and training capability on the enterprise sales side. And all those things come together into what we call news to knowledge, which we take knowledge, we take news, and we elevate it to this strategic workforce intelligence concept, where we keep you smart about your workforce while keeping your workforce smarter about what's happening in their industry. And so over the last few years, we've seen this grow rapidly in cybersecurity as investment continues to grow in cyber, as all these businesses come online, startups and venture and governments investing, the private and public sector. And we started to get this idea that there was nothing really unique about cyber that said that we could only do this in cybersecurity, that really we were looking for industries that had a professionalized workforce, that were characterized by massive, rapid technology change, where those workforces were having trouble keeping up and separating the signal from the noise. And so we, over the last 2 years, evaluated a number of other high-tech industries, and the space industry came out on top, looking at some of the characteristics about the space industry, about the workforce, the professional identity, the technology, and the level of investment coming into the industry. It really reminded us of what cyber looked like about 8 to 10 years ago, and kind of why we entered that market originally. And so we decided now is the perfect time to start applying what we've learned from that other high-tech industry into the space industry. And on the other side, there's also incredible overlaps between cybersecurity and space as well. And so we really wanted to bridge that gap and bring them together and kind of share across those two communities.
I'd like to highlight that anybody that's been on a computer in this decade knows that security is extremely important, or have ever been hacked. But, that was one of the very first moves that Russia made against the Ukraine, was to knock out their satellite system with a computer hack. So
Most
space,
definitely.
Cyber is space, space is cyber. So, it is very crucial. And I was listening to one of your T-minus here lately, and you had a guest on that was talking about the cyber vulnerabilities that like new startups or new companies that are going into the space industry. It's basically a back door sometimes if they don't concentrate on cybersecurity, and you help educate them as well. So do you want to go a little bit down that road?
It's critical. Yeah, absolutely critical. When you think about the genesis of the space industry as well as the cybersecurity industry, they both kind of find their the original innovators in the telecommunications industry. So they have kind of the same genesis as the two industries. So the underpinning technology in terms of RF communications and networked technologies is actually fairly similar between the two. And as you rightly pointed out, in this new environment of strategic competition, nation-state competition, the first attack, the first preparing of the battle space is going to be through cyberspace. And oftentimes it's going to be cyberspace through the critical communications networks, which all touch the space segment. And so, in this environment of defense security and national security, we think of cyber and space as the first move in every type of conflict. And so that's kind of getting to my point of these two communities, these two industries are inextricably linked. They need to work closely together. Something that I've noticed over the past year and a half, 2 years, when attending these space conferences to understand the landscape, understand and meet partners and to build this brand, is you talk to folks in the industry and ask them their biggest concerns. And they're all saying cybersecurity is one of their biggest concerns. They are concerned about the security of the space segment. But then you go and you look at the exhibit floor, the expo floor, you look at the companies and the types of products and services that those companies are offering at these space conferences. You're not seeing much cybersecurity. And so there's a fundamental miss between what the companies are offering these people working, these professionals working in the space industry, and what those professionals need and know that they need. So that's one of our missions as well, is to bridge that gap between cyber and space and to bring those services, those technologies, and the people working in the space industry together to solve some of these wicked problems, because they are absolutely wicked problems. I've been in cybersecurity close on to 15 years now. Everything from serving in the Navy, working at NSA and Cyber Command, to private sector cybersecurity and critical infrastructure. And it is a hard problem to solve. It is not purely a technology problem. It's a people and process and policy problem as well. And so it's inherently multidisciplinary, which we see as well in the space industry with everything from policy and regulation to new technology and new businesses coming up.
Like I was saying, some of these new companies that are starting to work in the space industry, they may not realize that they are leaving the back door wide open to an attack that can, move its way up through the chain and create a real problem for, the U.S. or some of our allies, and unknowing.
Yeah, that's a critical problem as well, where you see the drive towards rapid innovation, towards speed at all costs, where you see investors driving these small startups to just get a product online, get a minimum viable product out into market that they can start serving the need of the customers. That's a very important market force. However, what that does is, as you said, introduces critical vulnerabilities. So you now see, instead of these behemoths of industry spending decades and billions of dollars developing an exquisite satellite system, you see companies launching commercial off-the-shelf technologies, satellites running with a Red Hat Linux backbone that have vulnerabilities almost baked in, and not really spending the time or investment is really what it comes down to on the expertise on the team to make those systems secure by design. So that is introducing some critical vulnerabilities into the space segment, into the link segment, into the communications architectures that these companies are using. And some of them don't quite realize, again, to your point, they don't quite realize the vulnerabilities they're introducing. So again, just shining a light on that and the importance of concepts like security by design, strategies like zero trust and risk forecasting when you're developing a critical component that has digitized systems, really is core, again, to our mission of providing the strategic level intelligence that professionals need to know every single day to be successful in this industry.
What you said, off-the-shelf parts. Like for example, some of the unmanned aircraft, the little unmanned aircraft, if you start using those, they have almost a channel built into, some countries that may not have our best interests at heart, and it's pretty much baked in. So
yeah, that gets to a concern about supply chain, right? Understanding where your parts are coming from. One of the benefits of the space industry is how heavily regulated the export and import controls are. That obviously is a barrier to innovation, but it's also a positive control in terms of ensuring the importance of the supply chain. We were speaking a couple months ago with NASA Deputy Program Director Tom Kaspura about his project. He does the Communications Services Project at NASA, which is a public program where they're investing in companies providing space-based data communications. And he was saying one of the core aspects of how they evaluate the technologies that companies are delivering for that project is the supply chain. So they look at the security of the supply chain, not just physical, but also digital supply chain, validating that there is security in that supply chain, which I thought was a prescient, very forward-looking, kind of a very mature program. Obviously, this is NASA we're talking about, so should come as no surprise that they're thinking along those lines. However, small businesses need to be doing that as well. They need to be thinking about the security of their supply chain, both physical and digital supply chain, and actually validating where all of these things are coming from and keeping up with it. Right? It's not okay to just get a snapshot at a moment in time. It needs to be an ongoing process for a mature program.
And get your people trained so that they're aware.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yes.
Which is where we come in, right? Get your
Right.
people trained. That takes investment, but people for every company. That is every company's biggest investment is their people, right? You're spending more as a company on people than anything else. So you really should invest in the value of that workforce, right? You should invest in the training, the knowledge, the growth, the development of those people, because otherwise you're not getting the most out of your business's biggest investment. It's not rational to just bring someone online and then let them flounder just because you hired them without actually giving them something to work towards. That's getting into a little bit of a soapbox for me, but workforce development, going back to my early days as a officer in the Navy, is just a core component of something that I believe in, where you have to put a lot of effort into your workforce to get them to perform.
Well, and to make them happy. We're dealing with,
Yeah,
the
of course.
people that go into space. These are not your average run of the mill, oh, I got to get a job, to earn money. These are people that are passionate about what they do. And if you just throw them into a job and you don't work with them, they're going to leave. Pretty basically. So
yeah, I think that's accurate as well. Right? There's an element of care and feeding, right? Of continuing to help them grow and develop and learn, and achieve their goals. Right? It's not your goal for that other person; it's what they want to achieve. So that's a very high touch concept in leadership of knowing what motivates each individual, what they're working towards, and providing them that. But at the core level, right? Everyone's going to need some sort of learning and training and development. And whether that's learning about cybersecurity and how it affects your space system, whether it's learning about what supply chain means in the space industry, whether it's learning about what marketing means in the space industry and how marketing can help support the goals and the initiatives and the investments of the business. Those are all things that we can learn. That content is all out there. And that's all stuff that a business should invest in helping their people develop those skill sets. That's kind of core to business success. I've seen a little bit of that as a challenge for some of these new space companies, not quite realizing that it's important to invest in more than just the traditional hands-on engineering activities of the business. That is characteristic of an industry led by engineers. I'm an engineer myself. I appreciate it. I get it. But that's not a holistic, mature business that is really going to win and grow and achieve the goals of whoever is leading that business, be it a board, a group of founders, partners, what have you.
Hold on to your boosters. We will be right back with Brandon Karpf with N2K after a brief message from our sponsors. Please like and subscribe to the Space Marketing Podcast so you don't miss a thing. To your point, there has been some very major companies that were led by engineers that had great product, that had great investors, but they didn't let their, they hired people to do a job and then they would pull them off of the job and put them on the line to get the rocket out. And they didn't let the marketing people do the marketing job. And therefore, this particular one that I have in mind is no longer in business. So marketing is extremely important because that's how your company exists. It's more
Sure.
than just a widget.
Yeah, it's the brand. It's also understanding where you fit in where you think about marketing, right? The core word there is market, right? It's the marketing professionals actually evaluating where you fit in the market, what your competitive positioning is, what your value proposition is, how you position yourself and communicate your value to the market. This is a whole nother soapbox of mine. I think marketing professionals have a problem themselves. They tend to be a little self-referential and a little bit of a kind of echo chamber of their own pursuits. I work in an organization where I sit between product and business development and sales and marketing and engineering, and I have a hand in all of those activities. And so I can appreciate each of them for what they are and what they bring to the table and the success of a business. The marketing profession has a little bit of a challenge these days, where the advent of social media and all these communications channels has really muddied the water about what a marketing professional is and what they do. It's not just communications. It's not just strat comms and public relations and social media strategy. It's also doing the hard research of understanding and evaluating a market, kind of like how my business did when we looked at other industries and said, okay, where do we expand to next? What's the rationale? What's the strategy? How do we actually put a go-to-market plan together, sequencing sales, product development, delivery, all those things as one cohesive plan, battle plan, essentially, and then implementing it and running it. I mean, that really should be in the wheelhouse of marketing professionals. When we think about the space industry, you have a complex market with buyers and sellers, supply and demand that is a little bit different than others. And I'm not sure that the marketing professionals have done the homework to really understand that and then to communicate it in a way that the engineers running these businesses will grok. And that is the most important thing, that you communicate with the language and you communicate in the way that the people making the decisions who are running these businesses can appreciate and understand. So really, marketing professionals in space have to start thinking more like engineers.
And be able to speak to engineers. Marketing
Sure.
is kind of like a moving target, and some companies think that they can just hire their cousin's kid and put them on social media, and they're good to go. And there is a lot of research, and it's also about communicating with people. It's about communicating internally. How do you communicate what the business is about to the staff, and how do you make them feel like what they're doing is important? It's about communicating to the investors. It's about making yourself look like you're worth investing in, and it's about bringing in clients. It's about upping the whole space industry. It's not just about the business, it's about the industry as a whole as well. You know, it's all of our job. NASA has kept it going for decades, but it's getting so big, and the world is getting so small that it's up to all of us to make sure that space has a good reputation. And but yeah, marketing is a challenge for a lot of marketing professionals because it has changed so drastically in the last 2 decades. And just from what I have been experiencing, it's constantly changing. And like now we have to deal with AI. Well, what does that mean? And how do we use it? And how do we not let it become an impersonal tactic? So but okay, let's go and segue into T minus, because I
Okay,
really am
sure.
excited about T minus daily. I do a podcast once a week, and let me tell you, that is a challenge in itself. And you do this and another one every day.
Every
So
day.
talk to us about some of the challenges of doing that, and then let's talk about how the challenges of marketing such a thing.
Sure. So we were one of the first innovators in daily podcast development, and especially remote development. 8 years ago, we launched the CyberWire Daily, which at that time was the only daily podcast covering the cybersecurity industry. And that really started as a news product. We had actually started before that as a business intelligence newsletter in cybersecurity, and we adapted that content to a daily podcast, and bringing in voice talent and sound engineers and musicians and that whole thing to staff. But we've, over the last 8 years, really developed this concept of efficient remote production, and kind of driving things from editorial through the production chain all the way to daily delivery. And it touches everyone from writers to producers and voice artists to composers and sound engineers, and then ultimately to the producer, who is the composer of the whole thing and delivering and shipping a product every single day. On the cyber side, we publish 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Every single day, there is something going out in that feed. On the space side, we started with a Monday through Friday product, So, 5 days a week, quickly expanded into a Saturday edition as well, which is Deep Space, which is kind of our deep dive interviews, going a little bit more in depth in a single topic. It is intense, as you can imagine, right? Producing a daily podcast, not a lot of people do it, because it is very hard, right? The notable players in that space are the New York Times, right? Others of that caliber, Marketplace, those organizations, NPR, that are kind of these storied media production organizations, and us, N2K Networks, which, not a lot of people know about us, but a lot of people listen to us, right? We just actually hit 70 million lifetime downloads on our cybersecurity network just the other week. And so, yeah, thank you. Thank you. We just hit 100,000 in T minus, actually just this week. So 3 months in, just hit 100,000 downloads. So we're happy with the growth. Obviously want to see that continue to accelerate. So, the challenges on our end are keeping the funnels filled with good content and good interviews. We're always looking for inbound. On the space side, we're still doing a lot of outbound, reaching out to people, finding folks to interview. Every single day we're producing a show that is, half of it is an intelligence briefing, where we break down the daily news, what's happening in the industry, why it matters to you as a space professional. And then the second half of the show is a short little interview, usually on a single topic with some professional. You mentioned George Neild. We've done one with him, a number of others as well. So that's kind of the structure of the show. So that's every day we're collecting from our various information sources, analyzing what's happening, producing a script, getting the script read by our VO artist, our on-air talent, Maria. Maria Vermazis is the host of T minus. And then awesome, getting that recorded and produced. She is awesome. She's a true talent, a true voice talent, and media talent, who got her start in the cybersecurity industry. And getting that through production. Something that makes it easier on us is our the core mindset that our team has. Myself and a number of the other executives at the business come from the U.S. intelligence community, and we spent our careers producing daily intelligence products for the decision makers of our national security apparatus. For a number of years, I was developing intelligence that was going into the president's daily brief every single day. And so understanding how to produce a useful information product every day is a skill set that one can learn and develop, and that's something that we've taken into the private sector. So that's really the core of what we do every day, is intelligence analysis. We've developed all of our sources. We know the questions that we want to answer every day for a professional working in the industry. We've done that analysis. We've developed what we call critical information requirements and priority intelligence requirements. These basically questions and topic areas that we're going to be reporting on, that we're actively looking for information about. And then we collect that intelligence from dozens and dozens of sources. Some of it's original reporting, some of it is adaptive, and then we analyze it like any intelligence analyst will do, is understanding the context. Why is this happening now? Who are the major players? Why does it matter that someone in the space industry should know this? And then putting that into the tightest script possible, right? We're looking for a 10-minute intelligence briefing, and that has been very successful for us, especially on the cybersecurity side, and increasingly now on the space side. People tend to like getting their information through audio. It's an intimate, high-touch medium. It tends to get the message across a little bit better. A lot of folks do the newsletter thing. That's great. That works. But when you think about the intelligence community, there's a lot of written intelligence that is produced, but every single day, a commander of a military unit, she will be getting a verbal briefing of the day's intelligence. That is an audio product. And so that is the way that we as people understand stories. That is the first communication medium, was storytelling. And so we're just kind of set up as people to process information that way. So we found it very successful. You asked kind of what are the challenges there. it is a slog every day, right? And so, even as the executive director, I still write scripts and work on that, and I still hunt for interviews and schedule people, and occasionally I even do the interviews myself when I need to. But it's fun because it's useful, and we get feedback from people in the industry who love it, who really get a lot of value out of the product every day.
Well, and one note I would like to make about newsletters is number one, we get so many emails that come through our box. So, sitting down and just reading through one can be a challenge. And you can't do that while you drive.
No,
You just
at least
can't.
you
We don't
shouldn't.
have self-driving cars yet. So,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
but you definitely have done your research into your audience, and it is like getting your 10 o'clock news, except it's all about space. So I mean, we
hmm
can't possibly, even when we have our hand on the pulse, there are things that you talk about that I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. I hadn't
yeah.
seen anything like that come through. So it
Yeah,
is
that's
awesome.
the benefit of going for breadth and having that little bit of analysis. We give you enough to get you started. Really, our goal, and by the way, our average episode length is 25 minutes. The average length of a driving commute is 26 minutes. That's a very intentional, structure on our end. You brought up the fact that you can listen to it on a commute. I listen to it when I'm cooking dinner. I listen to our other daily show when I'm doing stuff like mowing the lawn, walking the dog. That's when people listen to these things. And so those are typically more personal moments, so they're more effective at getting that information across. But yeah, I mean, to your point about having it be about space, the thing that you care about, but also kind of revealing things that you don't necessarily hear in the most popular newsletters, right? That they typically
Right.
have a single focus, right? National security, business, right? New investment, satellite communications. Whereas we are looking at the whole industry. We collect information out of countries that America considers to be adversaries, right? We have a Russian linguist on staff who is in Telegram channels looking for information coming out of Russia. And so we typically can get into information channels that others don't use, and we report on it. So we report on a lot of information that is international in nature. We report on information certainly out of China and Russia, North Korea, as well as the EU and Australia and Africa and South America. So it's not just a U.S. focus. We really do collect information globally.
One of the points that I'd also like to make is when you are a company and you're looking to do promotion and get your news out there, part of what marketing is public relations and doing press releases and announcements. So make
Yes.
sure that your news carriers get your information. So
Yes, that is very important. Yes, most definitely, and it certainly would help my job if if the every business out there that sends a press release just CCs space at n2k.com, right? Just
well,
sends it to my email directly, so that I don't have to go and hunt for it. I do sign up for dozens of businesses, RSS feeds and news channels. So I try to get as much of that inbound as possible. But we do spend the first couple hours of every day doing collection, and going and tapping into each of our information sources, whether it's a news channel, a press channel, or something of that sort, and finding the stories that we're going to cover every day. That's still a multi-hour process.
yeah, it's a lot of information. I mean, the world is a lot of
Yeah.
information. I just,
It
yes.
is, and that's the value of a daily podcast, where it's synthesized and aggregated and analyzed. Because otherwise, again, it's more noise than it is signal, and our job at N2K Space is to flip that, right? It's more signal, less noise. It's telling you just what you need to know to get you started. So when you walk into that meeting at 9 a.m. at work, you already have a little bit of a primer about what's happening and why it matters. Or if you're the CEO or a VP running a business, where you can say, hey, I heard about this thing. can you maybe dig into that a little bit? Or I heard about this new contract. Can you maybe go find a little more information? We're getting you started, right? It's a baseline level of knowledge and intelligence.
I'd like to, the dig in part is that you have excellent show notes. And I can't tell you how many times I've already been to the show notes to see, okay, they mentioned something like
Good.
that. What was that? What was that? So I love the show notes. They're my favorite show notes of anything I've ever listened to.
It's such an important resource. I've taken a lot of tips from on the cyber network, CyberWire, N2K Cyber Network. We publish the International Spy Museum's podcast. It's called Spycast. It's a fantastic show. It's a weekly put on by Andrew Hammond. He's the curator of the International Spy Museum. A brilliant man, historian, comes from Scotland and a military intelligence background, but he for years has put together these show notes that are just extraordinary. I mean, absolutely incredible. I mean, resources that you can go and learn and dive deep and kind of expand your knowledge. And so when we were developing T- Space Daily, we wanted to make sure that level of usefulness could be found, that we provided the resources that someone could go and expand their knowledge, dive a little bit deeper, go and research something. And so that's kind of who we learned that from, and we've really embraced it, where we want to provide, again, useful additional resources that if someone has time or says, hey, that was one topic I wanted to dig a little deeper on, that is just a click away, right? That is at your fingertips, whether it's in your podcast app or you go to our website, right? The show notes are there. You can dig in and go that next level down into a specific topic that we cover every single day. That's core to the mission.
Well, you've inspired me to do better on my show notes as well. So
templates make it easier. It's definitely templatize, have a structure. I spend the either myself or our producer Alice, who you mentioned, Alice Carruth. She's another incredible talent. Comes from a media background and PR. Worked at Al Jazeera for a number of years, and we develop those show notes. That's the last thing we do every day before publishing a show. Is we develop those show notes and we ship it with the show every single day. So that's another thing. The other resource that we also provide are transcripts. So we invest actually quite a bit in having a human-in-the-loop transcription service where a human actually, it's not just AI generated, it's actually a person writing the transcripts for every single show. We do that for accessibility reasons. Sometimes folks can't listen, or they need a printout or something like that. Maybe that's how they learn better. So that's another service we provide of every single thing that we publish in both networks gets transcribed, and we publish those transcripts.
And that's huge. Everybody, there's a lot of talk about AI and how it does things. But let me tell you, AI is not infallible. So for some reason,
Right.
It can't figure out my name. Izzy is just too hard for it. NASA, they have a really hard time with NASA.
Really?
Okay. Yeah, they call it Nasser. I have to go back through all of my transcripts and make sure that they're correct. So, yes.
So that's a really important investment that we make in our audience. Is we want them to be able to access the intelligence regardless of who they are, how they learn, the ways that they want to consume information. That resource is there for them.
Yep. So what have been some of the successes that you've had with marketing T-? I mean, you just said you just went over 100,000 in downloads.
100,000 downloads. Yeah, 100,000 downloads.
So
yeah, less than 3 months.
How did I know that I learned of it on LinkedIn? So tell us some channels that have been successful for you.
Yeah, so this gets to our earlier conversation about the importance of marketing and communications. This all started, as I said, in the core market function of research and data analysis, right? Evaluating which market we were going to expand into, what our competitive position was in that market, if that market even needed us, right? So when we looked at all these markets, we discovered space had no daily podcast, right? Had a bunch of daily newsletters, had a lot of daily content, right? A lot of information every single day was coming out about the space industry, but there was no daily podcast covering the industry. A number of good weeklies, valuable weekly podcasts, a couple, different frequencies. So that core marketing function of data and research, and said, yeah, this is the right target for us to, put our flag in the sand as the daily for the space industry. And so that, started there, and then it was identifying communication channels, critical conferences to attend. And so we laid the groundwork by hiring Maria and hiring Alice and starting to develop content and developing our voice. We actually produced a whole bunch of episodes that we never published, just to get into the, frequency of it, collecting interviews and figuring out what the show notes would look like and what the scripting would look like, and all planned towards a launch at the Space Symposium, right? Biggest space conference of the year in the U.S. And so that is where we officially launched and went public. We did some, cross-channel communications through Space News and through some other partners. I was at Space Symposium telling everyone I met about it, communicating, kind of going through that the core on the ground type, handshake introductions. And then at that stage, it's finding people who will share the show, right? Bringing people on who have audiences themselves, working with folks. We worked closely with Christina Korp in development, the astronaut wrangler. She's got a great audience, and she loves this industry, and she was incredibly helpful getting us off the ground, introducing us to folks, helping us develop the show. A number of those episodes I mentioned that we never published, we had her listen to, and a couple others, some folks at Starfish Space, some folks at Stoke Space, who would listen and just give us feedback and say, hey, change this, adjust that. And then when it came time to go public, would help us publicize it. We've definitely integrated a social media and an email marketing focus. And so I would say overall success. The launch went great. We grew audience very quickly to over 1,000 daily downloads, very fast, probably faster than almost any podcast we've launched in our network. And we published 26 different podcasts across our network.
Wow.
So we do a lot of podcasts. And so this one has grown faster. That's not to say that we haven't had our challenges, right? At this stage, audience growth has plateaued. I'll say that honestly. We've stopped growing for the last month, and right now I'm trying to figure out why, and kind of where we can reach new audience, where we can grow. Obviously, over 1,000 daily downloads is good, but it's not where we want to be, right? We want to be more in the 10 to 20,000 range, which is where we will get eventually. But it's figuring out how, and from a marketing perspective, where we can reach that audience, the channels we can communicate through. We've communicated pretty well through Space News a few times. I think that we might be reaching the end of growth through that channel. We'll see. But always looking for more. So if you or anyone in your audience have recommendations or thoughts, I'm all ears. The goal here is to make this useful for the largest audience possible in the industry. So I just want it to keep growing, keep getting bigger. 100,000 downloads is great. I'm excited for 1 million, and then 10 million after that.
Right, and as the industry grows, and it is growing at leaps and bounds. So, and that can segue right into our next question. You understand your audience, and that is key. And you know that space is your audience for this particular one. Where do you see it going in the next 10 to 20 years?
Wow, the industry?
Yes,
Or the podcast?
I mean, obviously you see a lot of potential in the industry.
Yes.
Sorry, in the industry itself. So
Right.
you see a lot of potential, or
Right.
you wouldn't put this much effort into it. So what's
This is
your
true.
forecast
Yeah.
for the industry?
Sure. Like a number of others who see this industry growing, we are at the cusp of rapid acceleration, right? We've seen acceleration over the last couple of years, but in terms of the usefulness of the technology, the business models that are being experimented with, I think we are just at the edge of a sea change in the space industry. I alluded to this earlier in the conversation. Based on our initial analysis of the current growth, the number of businesses, the number of things like open job recs, position titles, those changes, that initial market analysis we did over the last 2 years, it reminded us a lot of the cybersecurity industry 10 years ago. Cyber 10 years ago is not cyber today. It was not something that people would talk about at the dinner table. It was not something that was a key differentiator for an organization like Apple, where you look at all of their billboards talking about privacy and security. It wasn't that 10 years ago. But today it's totally democratized to the point that everyone talks about it. It's a normal topic of conversation. People aren't afraid of it as much. It's much more approachable. It's usable, right? There are consumer technologies that are usable in security. Password managers and security keys, and Google rolling out something called Passkey in the last couple of weeks or a couple months ago. That is a consumer security product that they just rolled out to all their users. That's not something you would have seen 10 years ago. And so, our assessment of the space market is that this is where we are. In 10 years, we will see this rapid acceleration and democratization of space-based technologies, right? You're going to see space-based technologies becoming a core component of industries. It already is in finance and agriculture, but it's going to become even more so, right? You're not going to be able to have a finance company, an agriculture company, a manufacturer, even a government industry doing site surveys or what have you, without someone on staff whose sole job is data analysis and space data communications, the IT professionals who are going to have to know space-based architectures for their communication structures. You're going to have someone on staff that has that knowledge and expertise, because it's going to create so many opportunities for your business and for your profession. So space is going to become a cross-industry function, just like cybersecurity has. You're starting to see this with businesses like AWS, right, where AWS is creating these cross-industry segments, and one of them is aerospace and satellite as backbone for the business. So they're kind of coming at it from the other perspective, but it's a service provider of all of their other functions and features and technologies. So I think kind of big picture, that's where we see the industry going. What does that mean for the industry? It means growth in terms of number of employees, growth in terms of number of businesses. Right now, I think there's about 5,000 space businesses within the U.S. That's a big number. But if you look at how many employees there's actually not that many employees. So there's a whole bunch of space businesses that have a small employee footprint, right? So we're going to see an order of magnitude change on that front. What that means in terms of the roles they'll be hiring, obviously the engineers are coming first, right? So they're hiring a bunch of engineers. Second are going to be, sales and business professionals who can actually bring those technologies to market, develop the business model. And that's when you're going to see now we need to get super competitive, do the hard work and analysis of where we sit in the market, and get to market faster, better than all of our competitors, to be viable as a business. That's when you're going to see marketing just take off. So we're still probably a few years away from that. But if we can, as a marketing community, get together and start laying the groundwork of here's how you do it well, here's the cohort, here's the resources, here are the conferences and the talks, then we're going to set everyone else up for success. Where we come in as podcasters and information providers is all of those people that I was just talking about need to be informed, need to be educated, need to learn, need to grow, need to develop. And so delivering them that information every single day that they start to rely on, that they start to trust as their core personal value proposition, their core personal differentiator in the job market, is exactly where my business, N2K Networks, sees ourselves as being successful and growing, is we become the relied upon intelligent source for all of those new professionals. So that's the vision.
I'd like to point out something that you said too, is that back 10 years ago, cyber wasn't even part of the conversation, and now it is. And I think that it's always It's been around for a lot longer than that, but it has not creeped up in the awareness.
Right.
Everybody at this
The
point,
popular zeitgeist.
yeah, everybody's been hacked at this point. They've had their email hacked or something. They've had their
Hmm.
website, something. They've had it hurt. So it is a part of
Yes.
their conversation and their awareness. And space is kind
Yeah.
of similar. Space has been around for several decades, but and it is part of our life, but it's not been bubbled up on the awareness yet.
Hmm.
We carry space in our pocket with our cell phone, but most people don't connect it. So
Right.
I think that awareness will continue to percolate.
100%. And the usefulness of it and the products around it, and the technology. I mean, something I'm excited for is, all right, space-based manufacturing, right? How cool is that, right? The ability to manufacture microprocessors and chips and other, core components that run our daily life. In a lot of use cases, you can manufacture those way better in space than you can on Earth, right? Or in
Yes.
microgravity environments. And so, at a certain point, not only is the cell phone in your pocket going to be based on space technology, it's going to be space technology. It's going to be stuff that was built in space, like that actually came from space. So, that's all coming in short order, faster than we all think. And because of that, the engineer putting together the cell phone, designing those parts, needs to understand where that technology comes from, needs to understand the space market. It's just like the engineer developing the software and integrating the components need to understand security. It is a cross industry market, and that's the opportunity for us for sure.
There's a question I always ask at the end, and so this is our final question for
Okay.
today. And what final thoughts do you have for our audience? What do you want them to mull around as they walk through their day and say, that's pretty interesting?
Hmm. So there's a couple things that have been on my mind lately, that maybe have something to do with space and podcasting. Maybe they don't. So the first is I find myself every day sitting down and having just so many distractions, just too many things to do, and feeling erratic in my daily activities. And so, here's a request to your audience, and you all can find me on LinkedIn or wherever. Email me at space@n2k.com or brandon.karpf at n2k.com. How do you, as someone who's listening to this, what are your strategies for limiting, the erraticness in your life? I sit down at my computer and I have a million things. I'm producing daily podcasts and I'm running a business and I'm trying to make sales numbers and I'm pulled in a million different directions. And I get the sense that's a lot of us these days, where a lot of us are still working from home and a lot of us have a million things going on and a million distractions. How do you slow down, assess the things that really need to be done, and do them with intentionality and with focus and with purpose? That's something I'm personally struggling with. So my call out to your audience is, how do you do that? And if you're in the same boat as I am, maybe we can ideate together. So that's number one.
Well, that's an awesome question, by the way, that I don't know the answer to either. So,
And I think I get the sense that a lot of us feel it, and we're not
yes.
talking about it so much. And so I would love to come to a solution. Number two is, as you are working in this industry as a professional, as you're thinking about where you're going, similar to the question you asked of where is this industry going, where are these professions going? Let's get even more granular, right? So, how do you develop as a marketing professional? How do you develop as a communications professional? How do you grow as an engineer, as a sales rep, as a business executive or operations or HR professional? How do you do that? Is it through podcasting? Maybe that's a great medium for it. Is it through reading? Is it through community? I kind of
All
want to
the above.
challenge,
All of
yeah,
the
all of
above.
the above, right? And I want to challenge us a little bit on this idea of growing and developing. Because I see a little bit of stagnation in a lot of communities now that I see cross-market cyber and space, where people are entering jobs without much direction, which is okay to not have direction, but it's starting to get to the point where there isn't tangible, deliberate growth in an intentional direction, and I attribute it personally to the lack of community. We talk about some of these industries as communities, but I'm not sure where we find those communities. I don't think we find them on social media. And to me, that's where we're defaulting to right now. And so there's a little group that I go to their happy hours once a month or so called NatSec Space, National Security Space in DC. And I love it. It's awesome because it's an tiny little community of space professionals who work in national security. And to me, that starts developing us intentionally with direction, right? It's an interest group. It's in person. It's not just social media. I find myself continuing to default to social media as a community, and I think it's failing. So that's, my other challenge to any listener here is, what are those in-person communities that you can use to develop yourself as a professional? And that's another one I'll call out. If you have ones that you really like, that you think are useful, send them to me because I'm looking for more.
Okay, I'm going to segue on that for real quick. The podcast that dropped this morning was on Mark Schaefer, and he is a marketing professional that has written lots of books, and community is huge in his vernacular. In fact, his last book, Building the Brand, is about building with community. And I know exactly what you're talking about as far as the in-person thing. When COVID finally relaxed and we were able to go back to in-person conferences, I realized that the online conferences, they're kind of like the bricks in a building. They're important. Mm-hmm. But it's all that stuff in between that's the mortar that makes the building strong. And you can't get that online. Person to person, feeling, there's an energy that is just missing, when you're not face to face with somebody.
Right. Yeah. Not to mention the furniture in the building.
Yes, exactly. So, and then we can get into the design and all kinds of other stuff about
exactly.
it. But,
exactly.
There's, don't rely just online.
Mm-hmm.
So,
something you and I were talking about, not on this recording, but we're talking about the space marketing community. And, you have your LinkedIn group, which I hope is growing. I hope it's expanding. I think that's an important start, but I would love to see, this is something that the cybersecurity industry has done, in-person cyber marketing society meetups, actually getting folks together who work in this domain and just having a drink or having dinner and having a chat and collaborating and working together and sharing. I think that would be something that will help the industry grow in the direction that I get the sense both you and I agree it needs to move towards.
Yes, it's very needed. It used to be where if you were developing something, a moon lander, you were it. Mm-hmm. All you had to do is get some investors, mm-hmm. and that was your marketing extent. But there's too much competition now to rely on that business model, and marketing is more than just sales. It is so much more.
Yeah.
So awesome.
Most definitely.
Thank you so much for our chat today. I loved it, and I look forward to seeing more of T Minus, and all that information will be in the show notes. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Izzy. It was a great conversation. I look forward to having another one.
Awesome. Well, anytime.
All right.
Anytime.
Take care.
A special thanks to Brandon Karpf with N2K for sharing his journey to space. Be sure to check out his links listed in today's show notes. Please like and subscribe to the Space Marketing Podcast to help get the word out about space. I hope that you have found this podcast useful for your journey as you reach for the stars.